Hello, everybody, and welcome to the BasuandGodin Notebook on this Friday, February 7th. And Arpin, when we say Friday, we say Future Friday. So we're not going to start with Future Friday, but we've got a guest today for Future Friday. So tell us more. Yeah,
our colleague Scott Wheeler, who just ranked the Canadiens third, came out yesterday on his annual prospect pool rankings. So we thought we'd invite him on to talk about it. So stay tuned for that. That'll be in our regular kind of an extended Future Friday segment this week. But before that, got to talk about where the Canadiens are at here. They have 2 games left before the Four Nations break. The traditional Super Bowl weekend matinees against the Tampa Bay Lightning and the New Jersey Devils.
2 walks in the park.
Yeah.
As one.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, it's hard not to look at this weekend based on what happened in California, only getting 2 out of 6 points there when, to me, 4 was the minimum for them to kind of stay in the race. So now I think they've kind of put themselves in a position where they have to kind of sweep the weekend to give Kent Hughes some reason to consider not being a seller at the trade deadline. Like, they need, they should have gone to California with this in mind, like, knowing that, and maybe they probably did to some extent, the players saying, like, let's give our GM something to think about here. Like, we've really undone everything that we accomplished, not everything, but standings wise, a lot of what we accomplished in our run. Let's give them something to think about. And then they go and they, frankly had 3 winnable games. The Kings are a good team, but they've been slumping of late. They were coming off a bunch of wins and losses in a row. So you had 3 winnable games. I feel like you had to come away with 2 wins out of those 3 winnable games. They came away with 1 and had to scratch and claw their way to a win in San Jose. So now I think if they don't sweep the weekend, and frankly, even if they do sweep the weekend, they might have already made up Hughes and Gorton's mind, but this is their last stand. They're fighting for their trade deadline lives this weekend. If you want all these impending UFAs to stick around, if you want to take a run at that playoff spot, they got to come out this weekend and show it.
Yeah, well, there's going to be if they manage to win those 2 games, though, they'll remain in the thick of it. But the issue with all those teams that they have to leapfrog in order to advance to a wild card spot, it's going to get only more challenging as the season goes on. So yeah, 2 very, very important games, and if we approach them in the light of what we just saw in California, I think that there's a few interesting storylines that we saw in California. I think that it's worth. We have to start, I guess, with Patrick Laine being put on the 4th line and Josh Anderson being elevated in the lineup to replace him alongside Newhook and Doc. I find it a very interesting development. First for Anderson, because as we know, he's been banged up, and we also know that he's been asked by Martin St. Louis to fill a different role this season, and he would not be defined by the number of goals that he scored, and to start viewing himself more as a, maybe not a defensive player, but a guy who would use his speed differently than just to generate offense. And all of a sudden, his speed and his forecheck ability brought a lot of a dynamic element to the Doc line. And, the other day in the previous episode when I told you that, I said that I felt as though Patrick Laine was dragging, or was sort of slowing down Doc and dragging him down. Well, replacing Laine with Anderson, now yes, there's the speed, the pure speed element with Anderson and Newhook on the same line, but also you've got a true F1 that if you choose to put the puck deep, Anderson's going to be there to get that puck first. But now he's got some interesting offensive-minded players to set up the offense, and try something interesting there. So I thought that for all of the Canadiens' struggles in California, I thought that Doc looked better on his line because of Anderson.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's unfortunate for those guys that they, an errant pass from Newhook to Doc winds up on Gavrikos' stick, and basically the goal that kind of undid the Mailloux goal that got the Canadiens to within one came with them on the ice. But still, regardless, I agree with you that in those two games, Doc looked a lot more effective. And it's not just Anderson's speed, but it is his heaviness on the forecheck,
physical
the physicality that creates space for Doc to and Newhook, frankly, to work with. What I wonder about is, what do you do with Laine?
Yeah.
It is, it's like, what do you can't, this is not tenable. Like, him playing with Evans and Armia is not a long-term solution here. And you don't, what's interesting to me is that, so throughout the weekend, you saw, like, neither of us were on the trip, but you see, like, our colleagues tweeting out the warm-up lines, and the way we tweet, the way we send them out, we post them on Blue Sky, whatever. You do them in the order that they run in warm-ups, right? And so consistently, the people who were there were putting the Evans line fourth, because clearly in warm-ups, they were going out fourth. If you look at the Canadiens when they post their lineup, the Evans line is always the third line. In both cases, both days, they were not the fourth line, which is weird. It's very odd. They've given the impression that this is their third line. Like, all season, Evans has basically been below Dvorak in the warm-up lines. Forget the importance. Like, Evans is clearly a more important player than Dvorak, and so I just found that odd that the Canadiens, seemingly on purpose, sent out a lineup that was not the actual order that they went out in warm-ups in. But anyhow, my point being is that you're not going to keep Laine happy playing on a fourth line, and you're not going to get the best out of him playing on a fourth line. And him, as an athlete, as an elite, a one-time elite player, who is seemingly sensitive to things like this, it's like it's not an optimal situation. So if you want to get something out of Laine, you got to play him with players that can take advantage of his skills, but at the same time, you have to earn that spot, and he hasn't done that. And so it's a tricky kind of conundrum for Marty St. Louis, in the sense of, what do you do with him? And I'm wondering, because you don't want to lose him, but he's not scoring, he's not doing a whole lot. Didn't look good playing with Evans and Armia. Didn't look it's underwhelming, to say the least, to be polite.
Well, it's not the assignment that he's used to. That's not his game.
Of course not. Yeah, that's it. And I thought it was good of him to come out in San Jose, kind of own what happened in Anaheim, not make too much of it. Didn't really say anything to put gasoline on the fire, if you will. I thought he handled it pretty well. Doc as well, actually. But I'm wondering if putting him in Slavkovsky's spot for a game to see what that looks like, if that might be worth trying, just because it's a difficult situation where he doesn't deserve to get that spot. And Slavkovsky, actually, you could argue that he deserves to be moved. I mean, he hasn't been setting the world on fire of late either, but
It's been
I just
hesitant, very
he's
hesitant
been
in his play.
hesitant and indecisive.
Yeah.
He's just been kind of, which I guess is kind of this. They're kind of linked, those two things. But yeah, it's an opportunity to see what it looks like. It's an opportunity to maybe see what you have with and give Laine one last chance before Four Nations. I don't know. It's something that was just kicking around my mind watching Laine go through the motions basically against LA the other night. Um, what do you think of that? Am I crazy?
I don't. No, you're not. But I disagree. Still, I think that those two games, I've come back with this point, but with the Canadiens have to use the way other teams will use it too. They have to use this break as a reset. You have two more games to play. It's not time to mess up with Slafkovsky in a situation where, yeah, he hasn't been setting the world on fire, but I think that the Canadiens have to just suck it up for two more games of having Laine play in that spot. And then depending on how things go at the Four Nations, you'll have Emil Heineman back after. You buy yourself some time to reconfigure things and think them through. Because yes, that's true that Laine has been shown to be sensitive to that sort of let's call it punishment or whatever, but he still has to earn it. And if you say, well, we don't want to, and I really don't want to sound insensitive here, but if you don't want to do something because you're afraid that you're going to lose a player or that he's not going to be happy, well, in the situations where he was happy and things, he was in a perfect situation. Well, if the situation is great for you and you're in a good frame of mind, it's your responsibility to keep it going. And if all of a sudden your play falls off a cliff and you're not doing that anymore, well, there's going to be decisions that are going to be made and that might not please you. So right now it's Laine's job also to get out of, climb out of that hole and force himself into a better spot 5-on-5. I mean, against the Kings, he was the least used forward 5-on-5, less than Owen Beck. So, I mean, he still has his spot on the power play. That's a good little, lolly for him. But 5-on-5, I mean, he's got to prove, no matter who his teammates are, that he can be an impactful player. And if I just take, as an example, the play on the power play, whenever he's on the ice with Caulfield, I mean, Caulfield in California scored his first goal on the power play since Laine arrived with the Canadiens. It's been a long time because there's such a focus on let's exploit Laine's shot. Well, if 5-on-5, that line falls into the same bad habit, well, there's a risk of losing Caulfield's shot. And Laine is not going to be like the sort of forechecker that Slafkovsky can be and is 60 to 70% of the time. So I'm not sure that line would really benefit from that change right now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't say that to benefit. Well, I do say that to benefit the line. I mean, it's just like I feel like first of all, you're right, and I agree that you shouldn't just be making moves to keep a player happy. But you also have to keep in mind, what is the optimal usage of this player? And frankly, what is the optimal usage of Jake Evans and Yoel Armia? It's not having Patrick Laine on their wing. And, he is, other than their shot being dangerous, he is the antithesis to Emil Heineman, who is the ideal winger for those guys. He's not a forechecker. He's not particularly fast or fast at all. He's just the opposite, and um, so there's that line that suffers, and the team as a whole. Like if you can't unlock Laine's offensive potential, the team suffers as well. So I think there is some impetus to find a way to use this guy properly and not only worry about his feelings on the matter, but also find a way to get him going. And you're not going to get him going playing with Jake Evans and Yoel Armia. And that's just seems to me to be obvious. And so I think there's a world in which him and Suzuki could be a fit. Suzuki can play at different paces. Suzuki can adjust to line mates pretty well. So I don't know. I find that having these two games back to back, then having a break, at least gives you the opportunity to see what that looks like. Maybe it works. And if it doesn't, then you at least tried it. You're telling Laine that, hey, we're not just going to bury you. You're an important part of what we're trying to do here. We're going to give you this opportunity. You can benefit. We can benefit. Let's make it a win-win. There's a way to sell it to him, but be clear that you have to go prove us right. Like go out and show that what we did was had merit. So I don't know. It's just something that came to mind watching him play on that line for 2 games, and I just didn't see how anyone benefits from it. But it was Anderson on the dock line was a positive. Something had to be done with that line. But the thing, and this has been the problem all season, is that you mess up the other lines to address that second line. Well, now that second line's been addressed. It's better with Anderson, clearly. But what to do with Laine is it's a thing, and you don't want to have a player like that just be not only in a spot that doesn't benefit him, but it doesn't benefit his line mates either. So I think what happened in those 2 games is not a viable solution either. So what do? You put him with Dvorak?
How about Dvorak? Yeah.
Well, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but you know what? If you feel as though it's the same thing, because I think that there's one way out of it, and I understand that you would not make a trade just to improve Laine's fit on the Montreal Canadiens, especially since he's got only 1 more year left on his contract. But if they were to decide to move Christian Dvorak earlier than the trade deadline, an immediate solution could be to put Newhook at center. And if Newhook becomes your third line center and you put Laine next to him, then your third line gives a more offensive spin to it. To me, that's a way to unlock certain things. And we'll see how Beck, if Beck sticks around eventually. Those are, I think that the Canadiens will have options to work with, but it's either we say, okay, Martin St. Louis says we're going to stay the course for the last 2 games, and after the 4 Nations, we'll give Laine another try with Doc. Maybe during the time that the Canadiens were successful, those 2 guys were playing together and they improved together. So it's not all hope is lost situation. There's a chance that it could work again. But I think that down the road, if you say, well, whether we put him with Evans or with Dvorak, it's much of the sameness. Much of a muchness, I think. I think that's the same.
Much the same.
Anyway, all these expressions are synonyms.
Yeah.
So maybe that you could unlock, new possibilities by choosing to move one of your UFA centermen prior to the deadline.
Perhaps, yeah. But yeah, I mean that's for a conversation. That's a conversation for I think, after Four Nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know. Let's see. Listen, we're recording this on Thursday just to be fully transparent. So I know that today is Friday when you're potentially listening to this. We don't know what's going to happen in practice on Friday. So, but I think the solution that was found to kind of deal with the way Laine was playing um, is not a viable one. So something else needs to be figured out. I think we can both agree on that. But it's yeah, what you do with it um, is definitely something else has to be done. That's all I'm saying.
Well, his player profile is the one of a second line forward, offensive minded forward, and if you
Mm-hmm.
happen to be like a juggernaut of an offensive team, well, maybe that if your third line is also offensive minded, then he can play on your third line. Let's say he's a top 9 forward at 5-on-5, and he's an elite player on the power play. But the Canadiens don't have that setup right now, so he better show that he can be a positive contributor next to Doc, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you're the impact that he's had on Doc would be even more problematic for Suzuki and Caulfield. To me, you're starting to mess with chemistry if you do that.
Yeah, maybe, but again, if that Suzuki line were like cooking right now, you could make that argument and you can make it regardless, but it's
No,
not
they
as
didn't
if
have it.
they've
They didn't have a good trip in California.
yeah, it's
Yes,
not
yeah.
as if they're playing super well. So let's see what happens. Okay, just before we get to Scott Wheeler and Future Friday, we did want to talk about Owen Beck and Logan Mailloux. Uh, Beck Beck had himself a good experience in California. I think he looked very good. He played. What did he play in Los Angeles? He played 11 minutes and change, 11:50, almost 12 minutes, which is more than Michael Pizzetta has ever played in a game all season. That's so. It was a good sign both in San Jose and in LA how he played. Looked a
in
lot more
San in San
comfortable.
Jose, in San Jose, he brought a lot of energy to that line with Dvorak
Oh,
and Gallagher.
100%.
They were
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he was yeah, that was their best line, and he was a big reason why. Um and so yeah, that's I think he's proving himself to be a viable solution to the whole Pizzetta problem. Now again, Emil Heinemann's return is imminent. And that changes things a little bit for Beck, I would imagine. They're not going to want him being their 13th forward, that's for sure. But he's definitely given them some uh, some degree of assurance that if they do become sellers and they do lose a couple of these guys up front, that he can come in and play a role, and that's looked a lot more definitive in that way than he did the first time he was called up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that he's that he's going to be a centerman down the road, but he looked perfectly comfortable at the wing, and it's I like the versatility in his game, the balance in his game, the fact that he's not the biggest guy, but still, I mean, he's so involved physically. He's listed at 5'11" and 191.
Mm-hmm.
He to me he plays bigger than that. And he's so stocky that it's his frame is really not an issue. But I think that he's a guy who's got more of a dynamic element to his game as he gets comfortable in the NHL. Made a lot of very, very interesting and quick passes.
Mm-hmm.
That set to among other things to set up Dvorak for a couple of scoring chances. But he's seems to the play goes fast, but he thinks at the speed of the game. So he's not. We were talking about how Slav was undecisive in his play in California. Against LA, I thought that Newhook had some of that too. Well, Beck has been very quick to take his decisions, move the puck, and not hold on to it for too long. And it's great because you'll have prospects like that, young players like that. They'll be called up. They'll be sent down on many occasions. But this latest call up, it's the first time that he shows that he could belong. So it's a very, very encouraging development for the Canadiens, because when you don't just survive, like Marty likes to say, but you actually make your line better, that's a different step.
Yeah, 100%. So definitely good news for Owen Beck. And even if he goes back down, he definitely will during Four Nations for sure. But it's I think he goes back with the knowledge that he showed that he can play in this league. So that's a good thing. Mailloux, that was a weird. I find the whole Mailloux playing in Los Angeles to be weird for two reasons. One, Jaden Struble didn't really deserve to be taken out of the lineup, in my opinion. It didn't seem like something. I mean, there's obviously a benefit. This was only the third time this season in LA. It was the third time this season the Canadiens dressed three right shot defensemen. The first two were Mailloux's first two games in his first call up in October, where he played and Justin Barron also played and David Savard also played. Otherwise, the Canadiens have dressed at least four left shot D in every other game. So that's obviously a benefit to dressing Mailloux, is you get you get to move Hudson back to the left. Everyone's on their strong side. It's I think was interesting to see what that looks like. But when you're Jaden Struble and you've already gone through a period where you've kind of lost the confidence of the head coach, the Carrier trade happens and you're suddenly out on a pretty permanent basis, and go down on a conditioning stint just to get some games, feel good about yourself, get your confidence back. You get that confidence back. You come back and you're not amazing, but you don't have to be amazing for Jaden Struble to be valuable to the Canadiens. You just have to kind of be solid. And I feel like that's what he did ever since he got called up, ever since the Gouli injury. He had done that. And then he gets taken out to put Mailloux in. And then Mailloux plays 6.5 minutes or so through the first two periods. He had three shifts in the second period. And you're just wondering, like, what's going on here? Why you put Mailloux in to play him so little? And then in the third period, he got 11 shifts and doubled his ice time. Played as much in the third period as he did in the first two periods combined.
Yeah, well, the Canadiens were chasing the game. They were chasing the game, and he's a better offensive-minded guy than some other defensemen they've got. So it makes sense from that aspect.
But that drastic a difference? I mean, he doubled his ice time.
Yeah.
The whole thing struck me as odd and made me wonder if this was or wasn't entirely the coaching staff's decision.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you tell me. Like, you put a guy in, you take a guy out that hadn't really deserved to be taken out.
No. Listen, Struble had gotten a promotion by being put on the top four to the left of Alexandre Carrier for that game in San Jose. So there was a message there. Go ahead, kid. Show us what you can do. And I go back
watching 16.5 minutes.
And it's not as though, yes, he had that late penalty in the third period, puck over glass, but it was not like some sort of egregious penalty, terrible mistake that cost them the game and that's worth, being sent back on the press box. I don't think so. So, and I'm trying to figure out where exactly, what did he do that was so terrible? Because Yeah, you say he's got to be solid. I don't expect anything great from him, but if you want him to improve, and he's in a situation now with an injured Caden Gooley that he can play, you want him to get reps. And as long as he doesn't hurt the team, those reps will help. And I don't think that the difference between Struble and Mailloux was going to be the difference maker in winning a game or losing a game in LA. So unless there's something I missed that he committed some sort of cardinal sins in some of his shifts, I was just surprised that, he starts the game on the left of Carrier, ends up playing 16 minutes, and is scratched the game after. It's odd because there's a level of tolerance given to other guys when they make mistakes, and in Struble's case, the leash is super short.
Yeah, which I just find odd. Like, I just don't feel like he's done anything to merit that necessarily. And so,
that being said, Arpin, let's just be fair though. We mentioned the other day that we were looking forward for the Canadiens to use the call-up of Beck and Mailloux to play them. And if you want to play Mailloux, unless Savard is too banged up to play, the likely guy to come out of the lineup for Mailloux would be Struble.
Yes. I think, like, you know, they're with the team, they're in California. You want to see what you have with Mailloux. You want to give him a chance. But, you know, if that's the case, why does he play so little through two periods?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, that's what I don't get. It's just, the whole thing was a little puzzling, and it kind of made me think of Sean Farrell's NHL debut a little bit, and wondered if there was something similar going on here. Although you would think Jeff Gordon and Ken Hughes would have learned their lesson from that situation, that do not tread on Martin St. Louis' sphere of influence. I think he showed them quite clearly what he thinks of that. But it's worth noting that St. Louis did not have a pregame availability before the game against the Kings, which you could have thrown out that that's a question for Kent thing. But but yeah, I don't know what happened. Honestly, I have no idea. But just the whole thing struck me as odd, and even if so, like, the thing is that if you want to take a look at Mailloux, it's 100% true that the guy that comes out is Struble. But if you're Struble, it's hard to not think that you have no leash, that there's zero leash, like that, because he already thought that. And now he was in a situation with Gooley out where he could play a little freer, in the sense that he didn't think that every little mistake was going to result in him being pulled from the lineup. He plays with Carrier in San Jose, does a pretty good job, plays over 16 minutes, and takes that penalty, and then he's out of the lineup. So if you're Jaden Struble, you can be explained all these things. Hey, listen, we just want to give Mailloux a game. We want to see what he looks like. You know, there's nothing about you or what you did or how you played. We just need to do this for this one game. You could say that till the cows come home. If you're Jaden Struble, you're thinking, man, I have no wiggle room here. Like, this is like, just I can't get these guys to trust me and I haven't been able to make myself indispensable to them, which he probably never will, but I just find it hard to, for him, it's been a bit of a roller coaster in that sense. Like, just knowing where he stands with this group, with this coaching staff. And this is another instance for him where he's probably left wondering that, like, you know, the Canadiens took a long plane ride home yesterday, and I would think this is something that he was thinking about.
Yeah. Look, the Dak was benched in Anaheim. Laine, we went in full details of what happened to him in California in general. Now Struble is scratched and replaced by Mailloux. I think that the common thread here is that Martin St. Louis wants his guys to meet the standards that the team has set. And when you opened the show by saying that they were playing for their trade deadline lives, well, I think that he's coaching accordingly. That the margin of error being non-existent, that he's going to try to push every button possible to try to squeeze some wins out of that group. And maybe it's a shift. When if we were last year, maybe that he would have been more in a mentality of saying we're going to live with Strubal's NHL growing pains, and he's going to come out better for it. But I feel that he's not coaching that way right now, and unfortunately, Strubel gets the short end of the stick in that sense.
Well, I mean, Marty's been clear that is how he's coaching. I mean, he's vocalized it. I'm sure he's told the group that because he's told us that, and that's not surprising. That's kind of how probably he should be coaching, because the Canadiens do have a legitimate chance to remain in this mix, in this race, because the race is not a particularly fast race. A lot of teams are making it so that the Canadiens are able to hang around despite this stretch of losing. But yeah, and there's definitely an urgency here, but that's also goes against the notion of let's give Mailloux a game and see what we have. Because if you're coaching in that context, that's not a decision you make. You'd rather go with with what you know, as opposed to like saying, "Oh, let's give this guy a cookie for making the All-Star game and doing all this, and and he's on the trip and he's in California. Let's make it worth his while. Let's give him a game." All those other reasons are secondary. The one reason I could see is the right-left balance thing.
Yeah.
And seeing it a game where you finally have that right-left balance on defense, first time in months. And so, I think Hudson benefited from being on the left. Matheson playing with Mailloux, I thought could lead to some negative fireworks. And by and large didn't necessarily. And so, and then the other side effect of that was that we finally saw the Hudson-Carrier pairing that I thought we were going to see when Carrier arrived. But we had that small defense pairing, and it didn't really cost them necessarily. Like I didn't feel like their lack of size was a factor with them playing together. And I think that's a pairing that could work if you get past the notion that they're two undersized defensemen. Stylistically, it seems like an excellent match, and really was what I thought we would see when Carey arrived. It took a month or two, a couple of months, but finally saw it, and I thought it looked okay. But yeah, well, Jaden Strubel, that's a tough one for him to swallow, I would think.
Well, if they were to keep Logan Mailloux for the next little while, if the weekend games were not so important for the standings, I think it would be a good opportunity to give David Savard a breather, and then have the two kids in the lineup. Savard has been struggling lately, and I think that he's for 2 games in 2 days, it could be a good opportunity. But at the same time, if the coaching staff considers that those games are too important, that you cannot risk to have one of your top penalty killers, and you're a steady veteran in the lineup for those 2 games, it might not happen. But under different circumstances, I could certainly see them say, you know what, we'll scratch David for one of the 2, put Mailloux in, and bring back Strubel. That could be a way to go around it, but it's probably not what's going to happen.
No.
Okay.
No,
so,
and it's also, that's another case where your GM might just be like, "Hey, let's not healthy scratch David Savard so close to the deadline. What do you say?"
That's a good point.
Yeah,
for sure. All right. So without further ado, this week for Future Friday, we are very, very happy to welcome prospects expert, Uber expert Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, who just published, he's continuing to publish his prospect pool rankings.
Montreal
He finished
Canadiens.
It today. Yes, that's true. The Canadiens are listed in number 3 in the 2025 prospect pool rankings. So he's got a list of 15 prospects that are included in on that list. So choices had to be made because some guys were left off the list. No one will be surprised to know that Ivan Demidov is number 1 on that list. So to discuss this very entertaining piece of reading, let's welcome to the show Scott Wheeler.
Future Friday.
Mr. Wheeler, it's nice seeing you, my friend. Welcome to the show.
Back at you guys. I'm happy to be on this version of the show. I've been on the show before, but not in this current iteration. So I'm happy to be back.
No, this is our burgeoning little empire here on Substack. So we're hoping that this continues growing. But anyhow, it's gone really well so far. And let's just get right into this because you have the Canadiens ranked number 3 in your prospect pool rankings. And so I'm going to gather, let's just start with the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to gather that the strength of Demidov's season and how he looks as a prospect was the biggest influence in this ranking, I would imagine.
Definitely. Not the only influence, but certainly it is the leading factor. You look around the league now, and one of the things that happens when I do this in the winter versus when Corey does his equivalent in the off season is that you pull the true top guys out of it, right? There's no Macklin Celebrini involved in this. Right. Connor Bedard wasn't involved in this. Matvei Michkov isn't involved in this. And as a result, the hierarchy of the top prospects in the sport gets whittled down, and the true top guys develop into a little bit more of a cluster rather than your obvious sort of 1, 2, 3. So you look around the league now, who are the top forward prospects outside the NHL right now? And the simple answer is probably Ryan Leonard, Berkeley Catton, Ivan Demidov. It's a pretty short list, and he's got a strong case to be right at the very top of that list, not just amongst forwards, but amongst the whole of the prospect hierarchy. There are some very, very high-end D prospects in the league right now. Obviously, we saw Zeev Boyum at the World Juniors. Artem Levshunov's playing in the AHL and playing 25 minutes a night. You go down the list, Sam Dickinson, Zane Parekh, Carter Yakimchuk. There are some high-end prospects even after we lost Laine Hutson and Logan Stankoven and Matvei Michkov and Macklin Celebrini and some others to the NHL this year. But Demidov has a strong case to be the top prospect in the sport right now. So that's a big part of it. But I like what they have behind him as well. You guys know from reading my work how high I was on Michael Hage last year. Yeah. Michael's had a really positive, by and large. There's been some dips, but has by and large had a very positive freshman season on a Michigan Wolverines team that doesn't have anywhere near the level of talent around him that they've had in recent years. Yeah. They've got several still, despite having graduated, Caden Gooley and Laine Hutson. And they've got several strong D prospects in David Reinbacher, obviously, who unfortunately isn't playing. But even below David Reinbacher, I think Adam Engstrom has an opportunity to be an NHL defenseman. I think Logan Mailloux is going to be an NHL defenseman and maybe even an impactful one if he continues on his track. They've got 2 of the best goalie prospects in the sport, unquestionably, with Jacob Fowler and the continued emergence of Dobish. So there's a lot to like. There's depth. You've got Joshua Waugh and Owen Beck kind of behind Demidov and Hage. That really the only sour point, if you will, of their pool, if you look at the way that their prospects have trended over the last few years, is maybe Philip Meshard just not really looking like he's going to amount to much. But outside of Meshard, their guys have tended to travel in the right trajectory. Oliver Kapanen included has traveled just steadily in the right trajectory, right? So there's a lot coming, but Demidov is the game changer. I think if Demidov is as good as we think Demidov can be, if he's a dynamic 90-point first-line winger, all-star, big part of the Russian national team in the future once they get back into international competition, if he's that level of player, and I think he's going to be, then that kind of changes everything, I think, for the future of the Canadiens.
Yeah, regarding Demidov and his production, we know that he recently beat the eclipsed the mark of Kirill Kaprizov when it comes to under
U20.
U20 seasons in the KHL. But when it comes to the strength of the KHL, I mean, I look at the top scorers in that league, and the number one scorer in the league right now is Josh Levo. And you got guys, Vitaly Kravtsov, Sheldon Rampal, who was a mainstay in the American League for quite a while. This is not necessarily the strongest version of the KHL that we've ever seen. So having a guy who's very impactful at a young age, and who's being an highlight reel also in the way that he produces points, is there any mitigating aspect of the fact that he's playing in KHL where maybe the league is not as strong as we would think it is?
I think if there were a mitigating aspect to it, and I do think you make a compelling case, the KHL is not what it was 5-10 years ago. A lot has gone into that, but the biggest factor for that is there are fewer imports playing in the league now than there was at any points in the previous 8 or 9 seasons prior. Imports have had a tougher time getting over there. Obviously, everything is complicated by the war in Ukraine. And as a result, the league has been watered down, and not just by Canadian and American imports. Canadian and American imports have actually still continued to go over there at a steady clip. But what they've really lost is the top Swedes and the top Finns and the top Czechs, players who have no interest in playing in that league at this point in time, and may never again really have much of an interest in playing in that league, just given how bitter some folks in Sweden and Finland and Czechia are. I think it's the biggest barrier for Russia's, not to get sidetracked, but the biggest barrier for Russia's re-entry into IHF competition isn't whether Hockey Canada wants them or whether the IHF wants them or whether TSN wants them. All three of those partners would jump at the opportunity to reincorporate Russia into the World Juniors, into the Men's World Championships, into the Olympics. You go down the list. It's the barrier is that the Czechs and the Finns and the Swedes have threatened to not play and participate in those events if Russia's participating. So that has had a real impact on the KHL. But in saying that, I think a lot of that is offset by the fact that Demidov is doing it while averaging still, despite an uptick to 18, 19 minutes in some of his more recent games, still on the season is averaging only about 13 minutes a game. And so to be at near a point per game, to sail past 40 plus points in the KHL, which is still a strong pro league, still a comparable league to the SHL in terms of the top level of professional hockey in Europe, for him to have the kind of impact that he's had and to make the kind of skill plays that he has made, frankly, he's not picking up points on rebounds and scramble plays in front and ticky-tacky secondary assists. He's picking up points because he's the one making a skill play inside the offensive zone or off the rush. So to do that playing 13 minutes a night, I think sort of reinforces that forget the league he's playing in. He's still an 18, 19-year-old kid who is regularly pulling off high skill plays against men. And that is in and of itself a very impressive thing.
He's a top 15 scorer in the KHL, and everybody else is playing more than 17 minutes a night on average. 17 minutes, and he's at 13. So it's pretty insane.
Yeah. Well, I just want to get, not to diminish Demidov, but I think everyone has just gorged themselves on Ivan Demidov highlights of late. Further down, in terms of the depth of the pool, like this prospect pool has always been defined by its depth, and that's why I think Demidov is such a game changer, because just as you mentioned, just because of how impactful he looks like he will be, and just a player the Canadiens haven't had, frankly, since perhaps Guy Lafleur. Like, honestly, like they just don't have players like this. So I agree that he's a big deal, but I was a little surprised to see Fowler at number 2 on your list, just because goalies are so hard to project. I think no one knows that better than you. So what is it about him that makes you so confident that he is the second best prospect they have? Because I think, there's a reason goalies don't go in the first round very often, is that they're just so hard they're just so hard to predict what they're going to be. What do you see in him that makes you a little more convinced, I guess, that he's going to be something?
Well, I think he has every single tool that you look for in a high-end goalie. He checks that box, and not just checks it, but checks it with emphasis. The only question about Jacob coming out of his draft year was about the fitness level and the weight. It's still a bit of an issue. My understanding is that he worked really hard in that very first season after he was that very first off season after he was picked to get into better shape. But the weight is now back up to 225, which at his height, he's about 6'2", is pretty heavy for a goalie. Other than that, and maybe some of the durability that might come with that if he stays at that weight or plays at 230 pounds at some point in the NHL. Other than that question, if he can get that sorted, if he can play at 210 or 215 instead of 225, it's all there. And it's not just all there, but the track record in terms of the statistical profile is frankly pretty remarkable in terms of what he's accomplished, not just at the USHL level, but now building on it at BC. He has played obviously behind one of the top teams in college hockey in consecutive seasons. They're the number one team in the country right now. They went to the Frozen Four a year ago. They were the number one team in the country for much of last season. But the strength of that BC team, as great as they've been the last 2 years, has been up front and the high-end talent that has distinguished them up front with that top line. And obviously adding James Haggins to the mix this year. And it's been in net. It hasn't been their D. They've got a pretty young D this year. They're pretty leaky in front of him at times, and he just steals games and plays at the highest level in college hockey that I've seen a goalie play at, dating back to, like, we're talking Ryan Miller. Like, he's been phenomenal. He's playing at least a comparable level to the one that Devin Levi played at. Devin has obviously had a little bit of trouble sort of establishing himself with the Sabres, but continues to play well in the American Hockey League and is still only 22 years old. I think Fowler's on a track to be a bona fide starter in the NHL. He's explosive laterally. He's got excellent hands. He almost never gets beat glove side or blocker side. He's really strong down low. He plays his angles. There's just everything is there when I watch him. And I'm not a goalie expert, and I rely more on other people for goalie analysis in many cases. But even if you ask around about Jacob, there's just a belief that he's legit, that we're not just talking about a tandem goalie in the NHL, that we're talking about a potential starter.
He's Luka Doncic.
A little bit.
He's kind of a little chubby. He's got a lot of game, but he's just kind of chubby. He's a little chubby. He's kind of loose. He's going to get off the donuts a little bit.
He'll get there, I think. That's once he gets into Montreal and they start working with him on diet and all of that, I think that'll be a big part of it. Yeah.
I have a big picture question before we dig into some more individual cases, but a big picture question for you. When you, I don't know exactly how many years you've been doing this list, but when you establish your list and you identify the best pipelines in the league, from one year to the next, have you, obviously the spontaneous idea would be to say, well, this team has the best prospects, hence they're going to be a very good team in 3-4 years. How direct a correlation have you observed between the teams that you would rank high on your list and observe a few years down the road how effectively they've become a very good team? Is it an automatic transfer, or how often have you seen the transfer from having a good pipeline to truly becoming a good team?
It is definitely not automatic. There is so much that goes into slotting these players in at the right time, elevating them at the right time, trying to get better while getting younger, which is the hardest thing in the NHL to do and is going to be a very, very difficult challenge in the next few years for the Montreal Canadiens in particular to navigate. There's going to come a time where a lot of these guys need to be elevated, and they're also going to want to spend money and clog up roster spots with more veteran guys because they're going to want to be near the cap. So that part of it is very hard. In many cases, what happens is if those two things aren't aligned, if the money that you've spent on veteran established NHL players and the elevation of guys sort of misalign, and you maybe get better at the NHL level before those kids get there, what often happens is those kids are then just used as assets in trades. So the best example of that is the Los Angeles Kings, who years ago had the top prospect pool. I think they were first or second in 2 or 3 consecutive years for me when I first started doing this 6 or 7 years ago at The Athletic. And very few of those players are actually playing for the Los Angeles Kings now. Obviously, Quinton Byfield elevated, Alex Laferriere has elevated, but it's many of them are playing for other organizations. They've been traded, and part of that is just because I think the Kings got better. The Fiala trade kind of changed things, and Kopitar was better for a longer period of time, and Doughty was better for a longer period of time than maybe they thought. And as a result, there weren't opportunities, and they had too many kids. Even Akil Thomas and some of the others that were coming up during that era for them have just struggled to make that jump. So I'll be interested to see what happens with some of the more depth prospects in the Habs pool. Demidov's going to be a part of it. David Reinbacher is going to be a part of it. I think Logan Mailloux is going to be a part of it. Michael Hage will be a part of it. But will there be room for both Joshua Waugh and Owen Beck? Will there be room for Adam Engstrom? It's the guys a little bit further down that suddenly if you're just a call-up guy and you're 24, 25 years old, you very quickly start to lose your value. So they're going to have to make some decisions on some of those kids earlier. Is Oliver can Oliver Kapanen and Owen Beck both be a part of the future for the Montreal Canadiens? I think is a question that they have to have with themselves. And if the answer is no, and that it's not going to fit into the capology of it all for them and what they plan on spending elsewhere at forward in terms of money with the cap going up, do you move one of those guys now when their value is higher rather than them being perceived as a guy who's lingering in the AHL and can't make the jump? So that's the calculus. And same goes for Josh Waugh. That's the calculus that they're going to have to make with some of those middle of the pack prospects.
Yeah, because they have a lot of those. That's been, as I mentioned earlier, that's been sort of the defining characteristic of this prospect pool for a long time. It's just a lot of good to very good prospects, but a volume of them that you believe that some should emerge out of that. And that's why I find, like, for a long time, I characterize the Canadiens prospects pool as being, they are 3 to 4 years away from having an excellent defense. Like, they should look good on defense. And as time goes, I'm not so sure of that anymore. I think Caden Gooley's obviously an excellent piece that they have. Hudson's just a dynamic unicorn of a player. And Reinbacher, I agree, is going to be an impactful player on this team at some point. He's the floor is so high on him. The floor was never the issue with Reinbacher; it's the ceiling, right? So, but I'm not sure if that's going to be true anymore. Like, when you look at an Engstrom, Mailloux, even a William Trudeau, just like there's just all these kind of middling. Like, what do you see? Do you think that statement is true? Does it remain true?
I do think Mailloux has a chance to be like a 40-point defenseman in the NHL. Like, I think he's got that kind of offensive pop to him. With the way he shoots the puck, how confident he is in possession in the offensive zone. Obviously, the defensive zone has been a work in progress, but he's made a lot of progress there this year in particular. He's playing big minutes in Laval. He's played those minutes better than I expected he would. Some of the mistakes in terms of turning pucks over and coughing pucks up and making bad reads with the puck have started to cut down. I think he's always going to have some brain cramps, but I do think Mailloux, I view Mailloux differently than I view Engstrom or Trudeau, or you even go down the list. There were guys like Rasmus Bergqvist and Luke Mittelstadt who I think have a chance to get entry-level contracts at some point who didn't make my top 15 for this. Obviously, Bergqvist just played in the top 4 for the Swedes at the World Juniors. Mittelstadt's a very good college defenseman at Minnesota. So there are other guys coming, but I think like Trudeau is just going to be a number 8, 9 defense. Like, I think he's just a call-up guy. I don't think you pencil William Trudeau into the future of the Montreal Canadiens as more than that. Right. Could Engstrom be a 6? Could he be a 5-6? Maybe. But if you've got Mailloux and Gooley and Hudson and Reinbacher, that's 4 pretty young players who are going to be a part of it for you. It's almost inconceivable that you could have a 5th young player in there. Like, they're going to want to spend money on that position and sort of have some premium established guys in that mix as well. So maybe Engstrom just becomes a 7-8 for them, and that's a good 7-8 to have. I think Engstrom has an opportunity to be a good player and a guy that you can insert in your lineup and feel comfortable with. He can move pucks for sure, and his defense has come a long way. But I do still think there's the makings of a really strong young blue line there, to answer your question.
When it comes to Michael Hage, what do you see? Because you allude to the fact that it's unsure whether he's going to be a center at the NHL level, that he could be a Jordan Kyrou type of winger instead, which I find very, very interesting, because for a lot of Canadiens fans, they're so eager saying, he could be the second line center of the future. Where do you think that in his development and in the type of player that he is, where's going to be the tipping point in determining whether he's going to be a center or a winger? In what part of his development?
It's all going to come down to the details and the off-puck play and his commitment to the defensive side of the puck. I think last year he was viewed by a lot of people as sort of a one-way type. I think that was misplaced in the conversations I had with scouts. And I know for a fact that the folks with the Chicago Steel would have argued last year that he was competitive, that he was bowling guys over, that he was physical when he wanted to be. But he's never been a super, super well-rounded player. I think we've seen a little bit of that even this year in college, just out there for goals against, where he's had a hand in the goals against, or he makes a sloppy play in the D zone that it doesn't clear the puck. Those kinds of habits will need to improve. And then faceoffs are going to be a big part of it. He's not great in the circle. So the little things like that. But as far as the skating, the talent, the ability to make plays in transition, the ability to sort of curl and get off the wall inside the offensive zone and off the cycle to find inside ice and make plays, all of that is quality. I think it's second line upside for sure. But could he end up on the wing? I think that's absolutely a potential outcome.
Which is funny, because the reason why fans are wondering about Michael Hage as a possible center is because of Kirby Dach, and everything you just said basically applies to Kirby Dach.
Hage has the skating to fall back on in a way that Dach doesn't. He's a pretty impressive skater, so I think that helps. It helps him get lower in the defensive zone. He gets when he's at center, he gets touches lower in the zone, and it helps his transition game. So there are benefits to Hage at center through the skating.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's when the Canadiens drafted him, I think even Ken Hughes wasn't willing to say that he would be for sure a center. And I think the center conversation has dominated the evaluation of this team for so long. Like, people are even thinking of can Demidov play center, and that's, I honestly wonder that as well. Like, I don't know, do you? Because I see him in the middle of the ice a lot, and like, I'm just like, I think of the center position, everyone thinks of faceoffs, and I think like the last thing I think about is faceoffs. Where do you play? Where on the ice are you most effective? Are you effective in that middle lane, or are you effective on the walls? And I see Demidov play, and he seems to be a guy who loves playing in the middle of the ice, and who would thrive there. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that that's something that they could possibly do with him?
I think, yes, I think he could play center. He's got the details. He's got the work ethic. He gets up and under sticks. He's competitive enough. He's strong enough. I think that was actually the thing that impressed people most at the Gold Star camp last year. Wasn't sort of seeing him on the ice and interviewing him, although he did come across as super charismatic in his conversations ahead of the draft with folks, and his English was better than people expected and all of that. But I think the thing that people were most impressed was how strong and stocky and athletic he looked. And I think you see that in his game. He holds on to pucks. He's got that super wide, very unconventional base to his stride, where his legs get way spread out, and he really stands and holds over pucks that way. But I think it's possible. I would be very, very worried about going down that path, though.
Yeah.
He's so talented with the puck on his stick. He's very opportunistic in terms of fleeing the zone and that kind of thing. Not to say he's cheating for offense, but he has a little bit of that William Nylander quality to him, where he likes to play on instinct and get free for himself. I think that's part of the reason it's been a bit of a work in progress with the coaching staff in SCA, is just his eagerness to play on offense. And I think that fits better for a wing package than it does for a center package. But he's also, as I said, super competitive kid, well-rounded player in a way that Matvei Michkov, for example, wasn't. And I think if Russia were a part of the World Juniors at the present time, that he would have been, they're so thin down the middle that he quite likely would have played center at the World Juniors, and we would have been able to see what that looks like, which could have been really interesting. But I think that's a very, very dangerous game. I've seen many a prospect, he's too talented not to work out, but many a prospect struggle with that move.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, I mean, he's played a little bit at lower levels, but it's hard when you've been playing the wing for a few years to learn the center position at the NHL level. It can be a risky proposition a little bit, but but at the same time, I mean, it's going to be a very general question regarding the Davidoff, but how talented is he in the sense that how big of an impact can he make on the Montreal Canadiens? Do you think how much better can he make this team just by his presence in the lineup down the road?
I think he can be their best player. In fact, I expect that he'll be their best player. I think he's going to be better than Nick Suzuki. I think he's going to be better than Cole Caulfield. I think he's going to be a star in the NHL. So when does he get to that point, I think is the natural question. Can he come over and have a 50-point rookie season and be in the conversation for the Calder Trophy? I absolutely think that's the case. But when does he get to that point per game or above level? I think that's going to be the test. And I think he gets there. I think he gets there, frankly, in his early 20s because he's that talented. He's immediately going to make their power play better. That's without question. But I think at 5-on-5, we're going to see him make a lot of plays as well, right from the start. So I can't wait, honestly, to see. I think he's one of the most exciting young players outside the league, and I can't wait to watch him play. There's often questions with those high skill guys that make those one-on-one plays at the frequency that he does of, are they going to be able to do that in the NHL? People even ridiculously said the same thing about Laine Hudson coming into the league. And I think he's going to do it. I think he's going to break ankles. There are only so many defensemen that are going to be able to stick with him one-on-one. I think he's going to turnstile some guys and make some plays, and he's going to go bar down on that backhand move that he loves in tight to the net. And it's going to be exciting to see him in a market like Montreal sort of grab the attention and be a star. And I'm interested to see what he's like off the ice because I've never spoken with the kid, but by all accounts, he's got some life to him and some personality to him as well. So it's going to be fun. It'll be a fun, if he sticks around long term, it could be a fun decade with him at the center of it all.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the work that you do. I'm so happy for you that it's over, that this thing is out. But much appreciate your time. I know you have like a million podcasts to do today, so thanks a lot.
Yep. Thanks, guys. I got not quite through it. I got the mid-season draft ranking to finish up here.
Oh, that's right.
Mid-season draft ranking should have been out 3 weeks ago, but it got pushed back this year due to the pool rankings. So that'll be out next week.
All right. Well, looking forward to it.
And thanks for being with us, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
So, always interesting talking to Scott about this stuff. So passionate about this stuff. He's really eats, lives, breathes this. And it's such a difficult game, evaluating these players. It's funny when he was mentioning the Kings, I was just looking at his 2020 prospects ranking, and the Kings were number one on his list that year.
Yeah.
His top prospect is Alex Turcotte. And he's like in a tier by himself, it's like he is and at the time, like he had just been drafted, right? So at the time, that was a perfectly natural way to look at it. And frankly, I went to watch him play that season when I went to visit with Cole Caulfield. And I was blown away by it. I was like, man, this guy is going to be a star. Like he is a stud. He's mean. He's fast. He's skilled. He's got everything you could possibly want in a center at the NHL level. It's like, this is a can't miss for the Kings, and he missed. So it happens. Arthur Kaliev is number 2. Samuel, I can never pronounce his name right. Not with the team anymore. Samuel Fagemo. Fagemo.
He's still in the American League.
Not on the team. Rasmus Kupari, not on the team. Akil Thomas is still in the organization, but didn't really turn out. Tobias Bjornfot, not on the team. Grundstrom, Clegg, Cale Clegg. Remember Cale Clegg?
Gosh.
But then you go further down.
Anderson Dolan too. Was he there?
Jordan Spence was 10. Anderson Dolan 11. Mikey Anderson 12. Sean
there's one
Dursey
guy.
14. So like it's still helped the Kings get to where they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a linear path, and it's not. You look at all these guys, and they're not part of the organization. They're not part of, but they are part of. Velarde and Kupari were used to get Dubois, which obviously didn't turn out, but still, it's a team building. They're assets, and so that's what I think. I think this is like a valuable kind of lesson when you look at the Canadiens. It's like you can fall in love with these guys now, but ultimately, when they're good, and I think Scott was good to mention that, yes, you have these young guys, but you need established players mixed in there, and that's going to be the trick for the Canadiens is turning this prospect pool into a winning team, and there's no hard and fast formula for that.
I'm sure that the Kings or the Kings fans, back in 2021 would have said, we need to make room for Alex Turcotte because he's our next number 2 centerman. And then they ended up signing Philippe Danault,
Yeah.
So Philippe Danault has been extremely serviceable to the Kings. And, you look at it in hindsight and you say, thank goodness for them that they did not just unroll the red carpet for Alex Turcotte and say, we're giving you the reins of the second line center spot and, go and run with it. It's been a bit more complicated. He's merely, establishing himself as an NHL player this year. So it's a long time coming.
Well, thank God they didn't think that way when signing Danault. They could have easily talked themselves into a scenario where they're like, well, we shouldn't spend all this money on Philippe Danault because we need to save that money for when Turcotte's going to need the big contract,
So the lesson that's there for the Canadiens, I think, is along the same lines because, right. we talked about it when we spoke about the cap the other day. The Canadiens in the next 2 summers will be in a position where they're going to say, who's going to be our Philippe Danault or who's going to be player XYZ, but who's going to be the guy that we go out and sign, and is he going to block, the road to the NHL to one of our prospects? But you need to make sure that these prospects will do the job, and you're convinced, and it's not just a hope play to put them on the roster and say, well, they're going to deliver on their promises. They're not thinking like that.
We've planned for you to be in the lineup this year, so you're going in the lineup. Whether you like it or not, you're going in, and you better be good. But I think the other thing that Scott mentioned that I think is interesting and very applicable to the Canadiens, like when he talked about, obviously we've talked about, Beck and Kapanen potentially fighting for the same position, but he mentioned at one point, and I think this is another pertinent area that's going to be delicate for Montreal, is when to use these guys as trade assets, when to sell high on a prospect before he himself lowers his own value. And that's going to be a delicate dance over the next 2 to 3 years, because it's not true that all these, like his prospect pool went, I think, 15 players deep, and didn't mention Tuck, didn't mention, like, a lot of guys didn't even get a mention who probably have some degree of a future. Tuck, Jared Davidson, Atush Koivu, Sam Harris, none of these guys were mentioned, So it's like, because at a certain point, it becomes overkill. Like, it's not even all the guys on this list. And as you mentioned, William Trudeau's 13th on this list. And as you mentioned, he doesn't really see Trudeau ever playing for the Canadiens. So flipping these assets or turning them into actual usable parts for the organization is going to be a big one for them over the next few years.
I'll say something about Trudeau though, and it's I don't know why. I think it's because of the chin, but there is. I sort of
a boxer.
No, I know, but you see what I'm going at.
Okay.
There is something there that I look at this player and I'm thinking he's got a chance, an outside chance, but why couldn't he be François Beauchemin? And I'm not saying this just because they both have the same chin, but they're both guys who, back in the day, François Beauchemin when he was in the Canadiens organization, he was 23 years old, toiling with the Hamilton Bulldogs. And he looked exactly the way in the organization, the way we can look at William Trudeau today. He's going to be a call up, Yeah. But he's got some offense. He's got some defense. He's got some physical aspect to his game, Trudeau. So he doesn't have like a wow dimension, but he gives you a little bit in every department, just like Beauchemin did. And once he left to an organization who had a need for that, just to fill a spot and say, we're going to give you your chance. He ended up playing 900 games in the NHL.
Yeah. Well, this is why they have waiver rules. This is why the waiver eligibility exists, because so you don't get stuck in an organization. Like the Canadiens eventually lost Beauchemin on waivers, because if the waiver eligibility rules didn't exist, they could have just sent him down to Hamilton all the time or wherever their AHL affiliate was, and he never would have had an NHL career. So this is why when people complain about waiver eligibility, this is why it's in place, so that the Beauchemins of this world can go somewhere and thrive. And that's an interesting comparison. I'd never thought of that, but that's and maybe that's what's going to happen to Trudeau. At some point, he's going to become waiver eligible, and they're going to have to put him on waivers to send him down, and maybe he'll get a chance in another organization. That's true.
Yeah. Because he's I don't see a clear path for him in Montreal because of the other guys that are probably ahead of him. But somebody's going to take a flyer on this guy at some point, because
I would think,
because all the scouts that are watching the American League day in and day out, they are looking especially for that sort of player, the guy that's overlooked, the guy that's not in a great spot. All these professional scouts, that's what they're looking for, that type of player that they're going to jump on because they say, we see a chance there for this guy, and we know that he's not going to get it with his actual team. So when the situation presents itself, we got to jump on this kid. So, so I don't know what sort of career he's going to have, but I go back to François Beauchamp and thinking, when he was in his early 20s, nobody thought that he would become the player that he ended up being. So,
yeah, that's super interesting. That's a good comparison. He also had Konushkov at 12, which I found we didn't get a chance to ask him about, but I find him to be a fascinating potential piece. Like they're going to come with it. They're going to get out like a polished player out of Russia in a couple of years at, age 24, presumably on the verge of his prime at that position, a right-hand shot, smaller guy, but still getting massive minutes and really showing a lot of potential.
When Scott was talking about the challenge to integrating and elevating all those young players, that's where having certain guys that are either in the NCAA or in Europe, or in this case, obviously in Russia for Konushkov, it's good. It's a good thing that that the Canadiens have to wait for him. The long-term contract that he's got in Russia, that's good, because you don't want to be put in a situation where all those guys, you have to give them contracts in the next year or two, and having a chance to spread out your prospect pool and have different arrival dates is a good thing. So maybe that Konushkov, I suppose that when the Canadiens brass went to see Demidov in Russia, they managed to see a game where Konushkov was playing against Demidov.
Well, he played against Demidov. Yeah. One of the games they saw was he played against Demidov in that game.
So
that Torpedo versus Scott. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a good opportunity to see him too. And maybe, who knows, maybe remind him that that he's still on their radar, and rightfully so. But the fact that they can let him develop in Russia and there's no stress, it's good, because once again, I think that it's a good thing that you have different schedule, different timelines for these prospects.
Honestly, and you look at that 2023 drafts, and the Canadiens got kind of roasted for how they kind of handled that draft. Obviously the Reinbacher pick was the top of it, and obviously was criticized for it. But you look further down, and that draft is looking really interesting. Like, first of all, round 3, Jacob Fowler. And it's, Konushkov was in round 4 of that draft. Florian Jacki was in round 4 of that draft. Conte Miller, we'll see if that ever turns into anything. But round 5, Sam Harris. Round 5, Volokin. Round 6, Philip Eriksson. I mean, all of these guys, almost all of them, are looking like they have a shot at minimum. And we just heard what Scott had to say about Jacob Fowler. So it was a pretty sick draft. It's looking good. I don't know.
Yeah.
A couple of years later, it's looking pretty good so far.
He's got Jack Eye on his list, number 15.
He's got Jack Eye on his list, and Reinbacker's going to play. Reinbacker's going to have a long career in Montreal. I'm convinced of it. But
yeah,
he'll obviously always be compared to Leonard and Michkov. But I don't. I think he's going to be a pretty special player for the Canadiens. That's my opinion. But should be an interesting draft.
All right. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this longer version of Future Friday. It's nice to make, since the team is struggling a little bit, it's good timing to turn our
look to the future,
look to the future again. Because it's funny, when the Canadiens were on their hot streak at the early January, there were some listeners who were saying, maybe it's time to ditch Future Friday because it's not so much about the future and it's about the present. I got news for you.
yeah, absolutely. We have mentions and comments in the chat like, it's starting to look at the draft ranking. And, Scott's midseason draft rankings coming up next week, as he mentioned. So check that out. And, the Canadiens, they continue trending towards a position where the draft's going to become relevant much sooner, or right around the same time of year as they usually do. It usually does for Montreal, but yeah, Future Friday remains relevant. The Canadiens have made it so. So congrats, Canadiens.
Yeah. All right. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you again on Monday. All right. So have a good weekend.